They laughed when I left the orphanage homeless until the deed to 800 hectares arrived. The sound wasn't cruel, not really. It was the hollow, echoing laughter of kids who had learned early that hope was a dangerous thing to carry. It was the sound of survival. I stood on the chipped concrete steps of St. Jude's Home for Boys, the place that had been my entire world for 16 of my 18 years, with a thin backpack containing 2 shirts, a worn copy of a book I no longer remembered reading, and a toothbrush. The gate behind me clanged shut, a sound of metallic finality that vibrated right through the soles of my worn-out sneakers. 18 years old, an adult according to the state, free according to the law, and completely terrifyingly alone according to the universe. A few of the younger boys' faces I'd watched grow from toddlerhood to teenage angst were pressed against the chain-link fence. Their taunts were half-hearted. "See ya, Leo, don't spend all your millions at once," one of them yelled. And that's what sparked the laughter. It was an old joke, a piece of institutional gallows humor. We all left with nothing. We all faced a world that had no room for us. The joke was on the world, on the system, on the sheer absurdity of it all. I didn't laugh with them. I just raised a hand in a gesture that was half wave, half surrender, and turned my back on the only home I'd ever known. The city air felt different on this side of the fence. It was thicker, filled with the exhaust of 1,000 cars and the scent of fried food from a street vendor down the block. It smelled like choices I didn't know how to make. For 2 years, I had dreaded this day, counted down to it with a knot of ice in my stomach. The day I aged out, the day the system that had raised me, however impersonally, would spit me out onto the pavement like a watermelon seed. Now that it was here, all I felt was a profound, disorienting numbness. It was like I was watching a movie about someone else. If you're watching this, maybe you know that feeling. That moment when your life pivots so hard, you get emotional whiplash, and all you can do is stand there and breathe. If you do, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is for people who've stood on that edge and had to figure out which way to jump. My story is about what happens when you don't jump, but get pushed and find out you can fly, or at the very least fall onto a piece of land so big you can't see the edges. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That first day, there was no land. There was only the sidewalk stretching out in front of me, a gray ribbon leading to nowhere I could name. I had $112 in my pocket, a severance package from the state for a childhood spent in its care. It felt like both a fortune and an insult. I walked for hours just to feel the motion, to convince myself that this new freedom was real. The city was a roaring, indifferent beast. People flowed around me like a river around a stone, their faces set, their destinations clear. I was a ghost in their world, a boy with no past they would recognize, and a future that was a blank, terrifying page. Night fell. The numbness began to wear off, replaced by the sharp, cold teeth of fear. I found a homeless shelter, a place that smelled of bleach and quiet desperation. I took a cot in a room with 30 other men, their snores and coughs, a symphony of broken dreams. I lay there, staring at the stained ceiling, my backpack clutched to my chest like a life raft. This was it. This was my inheritance. The laughter from the boys at the fence echoed in my ears, but now it sounded different. It sounded like a prophecy. For the next 3 weeks, that was my life. Wake up before dawn, leave the shelter, walk the streets, try to find a day labor job that didn't require a permanent address or a phone number. I moved boxes, washed dishes, swept floors. I learned the geography of the city's forgotten corners, the best places to find cheap food, the libraries where you could stay warm for hours without being bothered, the parks where you could be invisible. I was fading, becoming one of the nameless, faceless men I had only ever seen from the windows of the St. Jude's van. I was learning the hard math of survival, the cost of a hot meal versus the need for a new pair of socks, the value of a dry place to sleep versus the gnawing ache of loneliness. I didn't cry, there was no room for it. Crying was a luxury, an expenditure of energy I couldn't afford. All my strength was focused on one thing, making it to the next day. The numbness had become a permanent shield, a dull gray fog that kept the worst of the despair at bay. Then, on a Tuesday that was no different from any other Tuesday, everything changed. I was at the shelter, waiting in line for the evening meal, when the director, a tired-looking woman named Maria, called my name. "Leo," she said, holding up a long, thick envelope. "You have mail." Mail. The word sounded foreign. Who would be writing to me? I had no one, no family, no friends on the outside. My entire life was contained within the walls I'd just left. "Are you sure it's for me?" I asked, my voice raspy. She pointed to the name printed in crisp black ink, Leo Sterling. St. Jude's had forwarded it. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It was heavy, made of thick, cream-colored paper that felt impossibly fancy. The return address was for a law firm in a town I'd never heard of. Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law, Pine Ridge, Oregon. I didn't know anyone in Oregon. I tore it open carefully, my heart beginning a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. Inside was a letter typed on the firm's letterhead, and a much thicker folded document tied with a blue ribbon. The letter was short and formal. It was addressed to me, Leo Sterling, and it informed me that I was the sole heir to the estate of my grandfather, Arthur Sterling. The name meant almost nothing to me. I had a vague, dreamlike memory of a man with a kind, craggy face and hands that smelled like soil and pine needles, a memory from before St. Jude's, from a life I couldn't access. The letter requested that I contact their office at my earliest convenience to discuss the matter of the inheritance. I unfolded the other document. The language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't understand, but certain words jumped out at me. Last will and testament, bequest, and a property description that made no sense. It listed coordinates, boundaries, and a number that made my breath catch in my throat. 800 hectares. I didn't know what a hectare was, but I had to ask one of the other men in the shelter, a former teacher who still carried himself with a quiet dignity. He looked at the document, his eyes widening. "A hectare is about 2.5 acres, he said, his voice a low whistle. "Son, this says you own nearly 2,000 acres of land." I stood there under the flickering fluorescent lights of the shelter, the smell of watery stew in the air, holding a piece of paper that said I owned a piece of the world, bigger than I could possibly imagine. I looked around at the tired, defeated faces, at the peeling paint on the walls, at my own reflection in a dirty window, a skinny, haunted-looking kid who owned nothing but the clothes on his back, and I started to laugh. It wasn't the hollow, mocking laugh from the orphanage. It was a wild, unhinged, incredulous sound that bubbled up from some deep, forgotten place inside me, a sound of pure, heart-stopping absurdity. I, Leo Sterling, the boy who aged out into homelessness, was a landowner. The laughter turned into tears, the first I'd shed since I was a small child. They streamed down my face, hot and cleansing, washing away weeks of grime and fear and numbness. The prophecy was wrong. The joke, it turned out, was on everyone. My inheritance wasn't the streets. It was a place called Stonewall Ridge, and I had to go find it. The bus ticket to Pine Ridge, Oregon, cost me nearly everything I had left. I sat by a grimy window watching the concrete sprawl of the city bleed into suburbs, then into farmland, and finally into the dense, towering forests of the Pacific Northwest. The landscape changed, and with every mile, I felt like I was changing with it, shedding the gray skin of the city and breathing in something new, something green and wild. The air itself tasted different, cleaner. Pine Ridge wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a post office, a general store, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1960s. The law office of Abernathy and Sons was a small clapboard building with a slightly crooked porch, tucked between the store and a gas station. A small brass plaque tarnished with age confirmed I was in the right place. The bell above the door tinkled, announcing my arrival. The man who looked up from a desk buried under mountains of paper was old, with a fringe of white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had the kind of weary, patient eyes that had seen every kind of trouble a small town could produce. "Can I help you, son?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I'm Leo Sterling," I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. His eyes widened slightly. He stood up, a slow, creaky process, and extended a hand across the desk. His grip was surprisingly firm. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Elias Abernathy. I've been expecting you." He gestured to a worn leather chair. "Please sit. It's a long journey from the city." For the next hour, Mr. Abernathy explained the situation in simple, direct terms. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, had passed away 6 months ago. He had lived his entire life on the Stonewall Ridge property. He was a recluse, a man who kept to himself. But he had been a client of Mr. Abernathy's father, and then of Mr. Abernathy himself, for over 50 years. The will was simple and ironclad. Everything, the land, the house, the contents, went to me, his only living relative. "He spoke of you, you know," Mr. Abernathy said, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "Not often. Arthur wasn't a man for many words, but he always made sure the will was updated with your location, at St. Jude's. He was keeping track of you, Leo." The words landed in my chest with a strange, aching weight. Someone had been thinking of me. Someone had been watching over me from a distance. "Why?" I asked, the question raw. "Why leave me this? Why was I in that place?" Mr. Abernathy sighed, a long, slow exhalation of air. He took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. "That's a question I can't fully answer. Arthur was a private man. He had his reasons, and I suspect they were complicated. He loved you, of that I have no doubt, but he was also protecting you, or protecting the land, or both." He slid a large, rusty key across the desk. "This is for the house, and this," he said, handing me a folded map, "is how you get there. It's about 10 miles out of town. The road isn't great, but it's passable." He then handed me another envelope. "Arthur left this for you, too. Said to give it to you when you arrived. It's the last of his cash savings. It's not much, about $5,000, but he wanted you to have a start." I stared at the money, then at the key. It was all happening too fast. My mind was still catching up to the fact that I wasn't sleeping on a shelter cot tonight. "There's one more thing you should know," Mr. Abernathy said, his tone turning serious. "The property taxes are paid up for the year, but a piece of land that large, it's valuable, extremely valuable. A development corporation out of Portland, Viridian, has been trying to buy it for years. Arthur always refused. They've already been in touch with me since his passing. They know the property has transferred to you. They will contact you, and they will offer you a life-changing amount of money." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Arthur made me promise to tell you one thing when I gave you that key. He said, 'Tell the boy not to decide anything until he's walked the land. Tell him the land will tell him what to do.'" I left the office with the key in my pocket, feeling heavier than any stone, the map clutched in my hand and my head spinning. The owner of the general store, a friendly man with a bushy beard named Gus, sold me a few days' worth of groceries and gave me a ride in his beat-up pickup truck. He told me stories about my grandfather, simple things about a quiet man who bought seeds and flour and never said much but always had a kind word for Gus's dog. It was the first time in my life I'd heard someone talk about my family. The road to Stonewall Ridge was more of a dirt track than a road, winding its way up into the forested hills. The deeper we went, the wilder the land became. The trees were ancient, their branches draped in moss, and the air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and pine. Gus stopped the truck at a rusted gate hanging crookedly on its hinges. A faded, hand-carved wooden sign was nailed to a post. It read, "Stonewall Ridge." Trespassers will be welcomed with coffee and a long, boring story. A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "This is as far as I go," Gus said. "The house is another mile up the track. Good luck, kid. Holler if you need anything." I thanked him, grabbed my backpack and groceries, and slipped through the gate. The silence that descended after the truck rumbled away was absolute. It wasn't the empty silence of the city at 3 a.m. It was a living silence, filled with the whisper of wind in the pines, the chattering of a squirrel, the distant cry of a hawk. I walked up the track, my sneakers crunching on gravel and fallen leaves. And then I saw it, the house. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, built from the same dark timber as the trees surrounding it. The paint was peeling, the porch roof sagged in one corner, and shutters hung at odd angles, but it stood strong, nestled in a small clearing as if it had grown right out of the earth. It looked sad and neglected, but it also looked like it was waiting for someone. It looked like a home. The rusty key scraped in the lock, but after a moment of resistance, the tumblers turned. The door swung inward with a low groan, releasing the scent of old wood, dust, and something else. Something faintly like pipe tobacco and wood smoke. I stepped across the threshold, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt like I had come home. The inside of the house was a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but it was all neat, all in its place. There were bookshelves crammed with books, a stone fireplace with a stack of firewood beside it, a simple wooden table and chairs in the kitchen. It was the home of a man who lived a simple, solitary life. I spent the rest of the afternoon just exploring, running my hands over the rough-hewn furniture, peering into cupboards, opening drawers. It felt like I was getting to know the ghost of the man who had lived here. In the small upstairs bedroom, on a nightstand next to a simple bed, was a framed photograph. It was of a young woman with a kind smile holding a baby, me. And standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, was a younger version of the man from my vague memories. My grandfather, my mother. I sank onto the edge of the dusty bed, the photo in my hands, and the weight of all the years I'd lost, all the questions I had, came crashing down on me. Why, grandfather, why did you leave me to grow up alone? I stayed there for a long time, just looking at the photo, until the last of the afternoon light faded from the sky. It was in that fading light that I saw it, a small brass key tucked into the back of the picture frame. It was intricate, old-fashioned, and it didn't look like it belonged to any door in the house. I searched for a lock that would fit it. I checked every drawer, every cupboard, every chest. Nothing. I was about to give up when my hand brushed against the stone hearth of the fireplace. One of the stones, down near the floor, was loose. My heart hammered in my chest. I worked my fingers into the crack and pulled. The stone came away, revealing a small, dark cavity. Inside was a metal box about the size of a shoebox, with a lock that matched the key. With trembling hands, I fitted the key into the lock and turned. The lid opened with a soft click. The box was filled with letters, bundled together with twine, all addressed to me in a spidery, elegant script. On top of the first bundle was a single envelope with my name on it. "Leo, read this first." I took the letter out, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unfold the paper. I sat on the floor in the dusty, silent house, and in the last sliver of twilight filtering through the window, I began to read my grandfather's words. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I know you have questions. I know you must feel a bitterness in your heart that I can never apologize for enough. I cannot erase the years you spent alone, but I hope I can explain them. Your mother, my beautiful daughter Eleanor, died when you were just 2 years old. It was a sickness that came on fast and took her from us. Her death broke something in me. But you, my boy, you were the piece of her she left behind. You were my light. We lived here in this house for a year after she passed. It was just the two of us. I remember you chasing butterflies in the meadow and laughing with a joy so pure it could mend a broken world. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I had to stop, to wipe them away, to breathe. He remembered me. "But the world is not so easily mended," the letter continued. "This land, Stonewall Ridge, is special. It is one of the last untouched watersheds in this part of the state. The water that flows from our creek is some of the purest in the country. And because of that, powerful people have wanted it for a very long time. A corporation, back then it was called Omnicorp, now I believe they call themselves Viridian, wanted to buy this land to build a bottling plant and a series of luxury resorts. They offered me a fortune. I refused. This land was your great-grandmother's sanctuary, and it was my promise to her to protect it. When I wouldn't sell, they started to play dirty. Threats, sabotage. They tried to frame me for a fire in the national forest. They made it clear they would do anything to get me off this land. I realized they saw you as a weakness, a point of leverage. They hinted that a single old man with a toddler was an unfit guardian. They would have used the state to take you from me, and once you were gone, they would have come for me with everything they had. I was terrified, not for myself, but for you. I couldn't let them use you. I couldn't let your life become a bargaining chip in their dirty game. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I found the best home I could, a place I was told was safe, and I let you go. I drove you to St. Jude's, and you cried when I left. That sound has haunted every single day of my life since. I disappeared. I became a recluse, a ghost on my own land, giving them no target, no leverage. I funneled what little money I had into legal protections for the property, setting up trusts and conservation easements that would make it harder for them to seize. And I watched you from afar, getting reports from a private investigator I paid with the money I saved by living off the land. Every report said you were healthy, you were smart, you were resilient. You were a survivor. I was so proud and so heartbroken. This land is your birthright, Leo, but it is also a burden. Viridian is still out there. They will come for you now, and they will offer you enough money to make all your dreams come true. You could sell, walk away, and never look back. No one would blame you. You owe this place and the memory of a crazy old man nothing. But if you choose to stay, you must know that it will be a fight. They will not give up easily. In this box, you will find more letters. They will tell you everything you need to know about this land, about its secrets, about the legal battles I fought, and about the allies who may still be willing to help. The choice is yours, my boy. A life of ease or a life of purpose. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you more than words can say. I gave you up not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to let you be destroyed with me. Forgive me. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat there in the dark, the letter resting in my lap, and I cried. I cried for the little boy who lost his mother and then his grandfather. I cried for the young man who grew up believing he was abandoned, unloved, a throwaway kid of the system. And I cried for the old man who had lived a life of lonely sacrifice, haunted by the choice he had to make. The numbness I had carried for so long was gone, scoured away by a flood of grief and a strange, fierce surge of love for a man I barely knew. He hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me. The entire story of my life, the one I had told myself in the dark of the orphanage dorm, the story of being unwanted, was a lie. The truth was harder and more beautiful. It was a story of a painful, desperate, all-consuming love. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold on the floor. But for the first time in my life, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I was no longer just Leo, the orphan. I was Leo Sterling, the guardian of Stonewall Ridge. I spent the day cleaning the house, letting in the fresh air, wiping away the dust of years of neglect. With every sweep of the broom, every scrub of the counter, I felt like I was not just cleaning a house, but clearing the fog from my own soul. I made a fire in the hearth, and its warmth seemed to seep into my bones, chasing out the last of the shelter's chill. I read through the other letters in the box. They were a chronicle of a 30-year war. My grandfather had been a brilliant, self-taught legal strategist. He had documented every threat from Viridian, every illegal tactic. He had filed injunctions, created a non-profit foundation to hold a conservation easement on a portion of the land, and built a network of contacts with environmental groups and journalists. He had spent his lonely years building a fortress of paper around Stonewall Ridge. It was a legacy not of wealth, but of resistance. 2 days later, a sleek black car I never would have imagined could make it up the dirt track pulled into the clearing. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. He was handsome, with a polished, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Sterling?" he asked, extending a hand. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm with Viridian Development." I didn't take his hand. I just stood on the porch, my arms crossed. "I know who you are." His smile didn't falter. "Good. That saves us some time. I'll be direct. We want to purchase your property. We know your grandfather was sentimentally attached, but you are a young man with his whole life ahead of him. Our offer reflects that." He slid a leather-bound portfolio from his briefcase and opened it. The number printed on the top of the page made my head spin. It was more money than I had ever conceived of existing in one place. $10 million. "This is a preliminary offer, of course," Thorne said smoothly. "We're prepared to be flexible. With this, you could go anywhere, do anything, never have to worry about money a day in your life." He was selling a dream, the dream of every kid who grew up at St. Jude's, the dream of escape, of a life without struggle. I thought about the shelter, about the gnawing hunger, about the cold that seeps into your bones when you sleep on the street. $10 million could erase all of that forever. It was everything I had ever thought I wanted. And yet, I looked past him, at the ancient trees standing like silent sentinels, at the ridge rising against the blue sky, at the crooked porch of the house that was the only real home I had ever known. I thought of my grandfather's words, a life of ease or a life of purpose. "The land is not for sale," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Thorne's smile finally tightened. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps you don't understand the scale of what we're offering. This is a life-changing opportunity." "I understand perfectly," I said, "and I'm changing my life by staying. Now please get off my property." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and assessing. He saw a skinny 18-year-old kid in worn-out clothes, standing on the porch of a falling-down house. He saw a nobody. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no idea that I was armed with 30 years of my grandfather's love and rage. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice losing its polished edge. He snapped the portfolio shut, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the sound of his engine faded, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had been tested, and I hadn't broken. I had made my choice. This was my fight now. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I took the bus back into Pine Ridge and met with Mr. Abernathy. I showed him the letters. I told him about Viridian's offer and my refusal. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Your grandfather would have liked that," he said. "He would have liked that very much. Now, let's get to work." He helped me navigate the legal maze my grandfather had constructed. We reactivated the nonprofit foundation. We contacted the environmental groups Arthur had corresponded with. We started to build a defense. I learned about water rights, zoning laws, and corporate loopholes. My life became a crash course in the art of protecting a legacy. But it wasn't just about legal battles. It was about learning the land itself. My grandfather's letters weren't just legal documents. They were a guide. He urged me to walk the property, to learn its rhythms. "The land will teach you," he had written. "You just have to be quiet enough to listen." And so I walked. Every day I would pack a small lunch and set out to explore another piece of my 800 hectares. I followed the creek that tumbled down from the high country, its water so clear and cold it hurt my teeth. I discovered hidden meadows filled with wildflowers I couldn't name. I climbed to the top of Stonewall Ridge and looked out over a sea of green that stretched all the way to the horizon. I saw a deer, a black bear with her cubs, and a bald eagle that circled high above me. This wasn't just land, it was a living, breathing world. It was a sanctuary. In one of his letters, my grandfather had described a place he called the cathedral, a grove of old-growth cedar trees deep in the heart of the property. He had included a hand-drawn map. It took me 2 days of hiking to find it. The trees were giants, bigger than anything I had ever imagined, their trunks thick as cars and their tops lost in the sky. The light that filtered down to the forest floor was green and gold, and the air was still and sacred. It felt like walking into a holy place. Tucked into the hollow of the largest cedar was another metal box. This one was smaller. Inside was a leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. The pages were filled with his observations of the land, drawings of plants, notes on animal migrations, poems about the changing seasons, but it was also filled with his thoughts, his loneliness, his grief for my mother, and his unwavering love for me. "I see a hawk today," one entry read, "and I wonder if you can see it too. I pray you are looking up at the same sky, Leo. I pray you are finding your own patches of blue." Reading his words in that sacred grove, I felt his presence so strongly. It was as if he were standing right beside me. I was not alone. I had never been alone. His love was in the rustle of the leaves, in the cold water of the creek, in the solid earth beneath my feet. His legacy wasn't just the land. It was a way of seeing the world. It was a responsibility to protect the things that cannot protect themselves. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, it's probably because some part of it is hitting home for you. Maybe you felt abandoned. Maybe you've inherited a situation, a problem, or a choice that feels too big to handle. Maybe you're standing at your own crossroads, trying to decide between the easy path and the right one. I just want to pause here and say, I see you. The world can make you feel incredibly small and powerless, especially when you're up against something that looks like a giant. But what I was learning out there in the woods was that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's as quiet as a seed growing. Sometimes it's just the will to hold on to something you believe in. If this story means something to you, if it reminds you of your own quiet strength, then please consider becoming a part of this community. Your story matters too. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you had to make a tough choice to honor a legacy or a value you hold dear. We can all learn from each other. Now, let's get back to Stonewall Ridge, because Viridian development was not the kind of giant that gave up easily. The fight was just beginning. Their next move was more insidious. They couldn't buy me, so they decided to try and break me. It started with small things. Legal notices began arriving, challenging the property lines, questioning the validity of the conservation easements. Mr. Abernathy called them nuisance suits, designed to drain my limited resources and my will to fight. The $5,000 my grandfather left was disappearing quickly into legal fees. Then the pressure escalated. A county inspector showed up, citing the house for a dozen code violations and threatening to condemn it if they weren't fixed immediately. The repairs would cost a fortune I didn't have. A logging company, hired by a shell corporation we later traced back to Viridian, began clear-cutting the land adjacent to mine, right up to my property line. The sound of their chainsaws was a constant, grinding assault on the peace of the ridge, a daily reminder of what Viridian wanted to do to my home. They were trying to isolate me, to make my life on the ridge untenable. They wanted me to feel as alone and hopeless as I had felt on the day I left the orphanage. And I have to admit, some days it almost worked. There were nights I'd lie awake, listening to the wind howl outside, and the sheer scale of the fight would threaten to crush me. I was just one kid against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I was running out of money. The house was cold and drafty. The loneliness which had receded began to creep back in at the edges. I missed the simple, thoughtless camaraderie of the orphanage, the noise, the presence of other people. Here, the silence was a vast, empty space that my fear rushed to fill. One evening, after a particularly demoralizing call with Mr. Abernathy about a new lawsuit, I almost gave up. I sat at the wooden table, my head in my hands, and I thought about that $10 million offer. I could just take it. I could be on a beach somewhere, warm and safe, with no worries in the world. I could leave this fight, this cold house, this crushing responsibility behind. I pulled out my grandfather's journal, my fingers tracing his familiar script, searching for an answer, for a reason to keep going. I opened it to a random page. "The winter is hard," he had written. "The solitude presses in. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Then I walk to the cathedral and I stand among those ancient beings, and I remember that I am part of a story that is much older and more important than my own small life. To stand for this land is to stand for them. It is to stand for the future. It is to stand for Leo." His words were a lifeline. He had felt this same despair, this same doubt, and he had found his strength not in himself, but in the purpose he was serving. He wasn't just protecting land, he was protecting a story, my story. I closed the journal and stood up. I would not be the chapter where the story ended. I would not let them win. I realized I couldn't do it alone. My grandfather had built a network, and I had been too proud or too scared to use it. The next day, I drove into town with Gus, who had become a quiet, steady presence in my life, always showing up with a hot casserole or an offer to help fix a leaky pipe. I used the library's computer to email the environmental groups and journalists from my grandfather's list. I told them my story. I told them Viridian was back, and that I was not selling, but that I needed help. The response was slow at first, a trickle of cautious replies. But then a young, tenacious journalist from an online environmental magazine named Sarah came to visit. She spent a week with me, hiking the land, reading my grandfather's letters, documenting the clear-cutting at my property line. She was outraged and inspired. Her article, "The Orphan and the Empire: The Fight for Stonewall Ridge," went viral. It was picked up by larger news outlets. Suddenly the world knew my name. The story of the orphan who turned down millions to protect his grandfather's legacy resonated with people. Donations began to trickle, then pour, into the non-profit foundation my grandfather had established. A pro bono environmental law firm in Portland offered to take over my case. Volunteers started showing up on weekends, offering to help with repairs on the house. Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, people who had read the story and wanted to be part of it. They fixed the roof, updated the wiring, and insulated the walls. They brought food and stories and laughter. My lonely, silent house began to fill with warmth and life. Gus organized a town meeting. The people of Pine Ridge, who had known my grandfather as a quiet recluse, now saw him as a hero who had been secretly protecting the water source their town depended on. They were angry at Viridian's tactics. They started a petition, wrote letters to their congressman, and showed up to protest the logging. The community my grandfather had kept at a distance out of necessity was now becoming my army. I was no longer alone. We were a movement. Viridian, caught in a storm of negative publicity, was forced to retreat. They issued a public statement saying they were re-evaluating their development plans in the area. They dropped the nuisance lawsuits. The chainsaws fell silent. We had won the battle, but I knew, and Mr. Abernathy confirmed, that we hadn't won the war. Viridian was just waiting, hoping the attention would die down, hoping I would lose momentum. The final piece of the puzzle came from my grandfather's last letter, one I had saved because the envelope was marked, "Read only when you're ready to finish the fight." In it, he revealed the land's deepest secret. The unique geology of Stonewall Ridge created a series of underground aquifers that were interconnected with the entire regional water table. His research, including geological surveys he had paid for secretly over the years, showed that any large-scale development or drilling on the ridge would risk contaminating the water supply for 3 counties. He had never released the data because he feared Viridian would find a way to discredit it or bury it. He was waiting for the right moment, the right ally. He was waiting for me. "This is the checkmate, Leo," he wrote, "but it has to be deployed perfectly. Give this research to someone the public trusts, someone who can verify it and make it undeniable. This is my final gift to you and to the land. Use it well." We gave the research to a team of hydrologists at the state university. Their findings confirmed everything my grandfather had discovered. The report was a bombshell. The state's Environmental Protection Agency launched a formal investigation. The political pressure on Viridian became immense. A few months later, Mr. Abernathy called me. "It's over, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Viridian just sold all their holdings in this region. They're gone, for good." I hung up the phone and walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the ridge in hues of orange and purple. The air was crisp and clean. The house behind me was warm and solid, no longer just a shelter but a home, its old bones filled with new life. I had arrived here a homeless, parentless, friendless boy, with nothing but a name and $112. Now I had a home, I had a purpose, I had a community. I had a family, not of blood, but of shared struggle and shared victory. I owned 800 hectares of land, but in reality, the land owned me. It had claimed me, healed me, and given me a reason to be. My grandfather had given me more than just property. He had given me a chance to build a life that mattered. He had given me back my own story. My inheritance wasn't the dirt or the trees. It was the choice he had offered me, a life of ease or a life of purpose. And in choosing purpose, I had found a deeper and more lasting comfort than any amount of money could ever buy. The work isn't over. We're using the foundation's funds to turn the house into a research center for visiting scientists and environmentalists. We're working to have Stonewall Ridge designated as a national protected wilderness area. There are new battles to fight, new challenges on the horizon, but now I know I don't have to face them alone. The scars of my childhood are still there. They don't just disappear. There are nights I still wake up with the phantom chill of the shelter in my bones, with the echo of that hollow laughter in my ears. But they are just echoes now. The reality is the solid floor beneath my feet, the warmth of the fire in the hearth, and the steady, quiet strength of the ancient trees outside my window. They remind me that roots can grow in the most broken ground. They remind me that home isn't a place you're given, but a place you build, a place you fight for, a place you choose to belong. What my story taught me, what this land and this fight taught me, is that the things we inherit are never simple. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the heaviest burdens, and sometimes the most profound acts of love look like abandonment. My grandfather set me adrift to save me, but he left a lighthouse burning to guide me home. Your lighthouse might be a memory, a promise, a piece of advice, or a value that you hold dear. Whatever it is, don't lose sight of it, especially when the storm is raging. I want to thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to my story. This channel is a place for stories like this, stories about finding our way through the dark. If you believe in the power of these stories, please subscribe and become part of our community. And I want to leave you with a question to think about, a question my grandfather's journey left me with. What is the legacy you are building, not with money, but with your choices, with your love, with your fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all, because every story of purpose, no matter how small it seems, makes the world a little bit brighter. Thank you, and be well.